right, strap yourselves in for this deep dive because we're going deep into London's most spine-tingling mystery, 50 Berkeley Square. Now, I bet you're picturing some creepy, run-down Gothic mansion, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Well,
That's the classic haunted house image.
yeah, but not this time. 50 Berkeley Square is actually an elegant Georgian house, built back in the 1740s, right in the middle of this super posh Mayfair district. So how did a place like this get a reputation as, get this, the most haunted house in London?
The most haunted? That's a big claim.
Right, and it's a reputation that's been around for centuries.
Centuries.
Yeah. We're talking ghost stories, chilling eyewitness accounts, people claiming they've seen apparitions, and then, of course, there are the unexplained deaths. We're going to try and peel back all those layers and figure out what's really going on at 50 Berkeley Square. Is it truly haunted, or is there something else, something more rational, behind all these spooky stories?
You know, it really is fascinating how a house that was once all about like wealth and high society, it transformed into this symbol of, well, fear and the unknown. We're talking about centuries of whispers and stories. It's like a ghost story that just keeps evolving.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. We got this fashionable address. Imagine, horse-drawn carriages pulling up outside, ladies in those big gowns, the whole scene. But then, sometime in the 1800s, this guy named Thomas Myers moves in. And this guy, he was reckless. The stories say he was completely heartbroken, maybe like a love affair gone wrong, something really tragic.
Heartbreak, yeah, that can do it.
Totally. So Myers, he just shuts himself away in this house, living in darkness. Like literally darkness, he couldn't stand any light.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, pretty intense. And, well, years later, he dies inside the house.
Alone.
Totally alone.
You have to remember, this was the Victorian era. Back then, people were kind of obsessed with, well, death and all things spooky. Spiritualism was huge. Gothic literature was everywhere. A story like Myers' solitary death in a big, dark house, that would have been front page news.
Oh, yeah, the newspapers would have eaten it up.
Totally.
And probably made it even creepier than it really was.
Oh, absolutely. They'd embellish, exaggerate. You know how it goes. It's almost like 50 Berkeley Square was meant to become a legend, you know?
Right, like it was primed for it. So it's not just the stories themselves, but also the time period. Those Victorian anxieties and obsessions, they probably shaped how people saw those events.
Oh, for sure.
Like, if it happened today, maybe people would have a totally different explanation.
Right. Maybe they'd blame it on faulty wiring or something.
Exactly.
Back then, it was all ghosts and spirits.
Okay, but then things getting darker. There's this account of a servant who was found dead in the house. And apparently, his face was just like contorted in terror, pure fear.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and there were no signs of a struggle, no explanation at all.
Just pure fear.
Just that look of absolute horror on his face.
That's the kind of detail that sticks with you, you know? It's like fuel for the whole haunted house legend.
Right, it makes it feel real. But I have to wonder, was this a case of, like, maybe there was some foul play and people just blamed it on something supernatural? Or was there really something strange about the house itself?
It's a good question. I mean, it's one thing for a place to have a spooky vibe, but when you start talking about unexplained deaths, multiple deaths, that's hard to just ignore.
Yeah, it's a pattern. Something's not right.
And then, fast forward to 1879, we have the story of these two Navy sailors. They were caught in a storm and looking for shelter. They stumbled upon 50 Berkeley Square, figured it was abandoned. One of the sailors ends up dead after falling down the stairs, and his friend, the one who barely escaped, he claimed that some unseen force attacked his buddy.
Wait, so this wasn't just like a drunken sailor tripping in the dark.
Nope.
We're talking about a first-hand account of, like, a spectral attack.
That's what he claimed.
Wow. I could see how this story would just cement the whole haunted house reputation.
Oh, for sure. It takes it from spooky stories to something much more real, much more dangerous.
And the story doesn't end there.
Sadly, no. There's another account. This time it's a nobleman. Found dead in the house, a loaded gun in his hand, his face frozen in this expression of pure horror. Again, no signs of a struggle, no logical explanation.
Okay, hold on. So we've got multiple deaths, all sudden and unexplained.
It's a pattern?
And each one seemingly driven by terror. This is starting to sound less like a haunted house and more like a horror movie. But wouldn't there have been like some kind of official investigation, police reports, coroner's inquests, something to give us some answers?
That's the thing with these older cases. Records can be incomplete, lost, or maybe they just haven't been looked at closely enough.
So we're left with these like tantalizing glimpses into the past. And we're trying to piece together what really happened. It's like a historical jigsaw puzzle with some pieces missing. So you've got these dramatic, tragic events layered on top of a growing legend, and then you add in that Victorian fascination with all things macabre.
It's like the perfect recipe for a truly chilling and unforgettable ghost story.
But what about the more, classic haunting stuff? the creaking floorboards, whispers in the dark.
Oh, we've got plenty of that too.
So it's like there's this baseline creepiness that's always there, even when there aren't any full-blown ghost attacks going on. But how do we separate what might be genuine paranormal activity from things that just happen in old houses? I mean, old houses creak, right?
You'd be surprised how often people mistake a creaky floorboard for a ghost.
Right.
But in the case of 50 Berkeley Square, it seems like there's more to it than just old house noises. The stories, the accounts, they point to something else, something unexplained. We've got a whole bunch of reports about, well, the typical haunted house stuff. We're talking about seeing shadows moving out of the corner of their eye or hearing footsteps when there's no one else around. And then there are the whispers, those disembodied voices that seem to come from nowhere.
So it's like this constant undercurrent of creepiness, even when there aren't any, full-blown ghost attacks happening. But how do we tell the difference between actual paranormal activity and things that could just be, well, explainable?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right. Like I said, old houses creak and groan. It doesn't automatically mean they're haunted.
Exactly, but that's where the paranormal investigators come in. They're the ones who try to make sense of it all. Some of them, especially those who are into parapsychology, they believe that 50 Berkeley Square is just saturated with what they call residual energy.
Okay, so residual energy, what is that exactly? And how would it, show up in a place like this?
Think of it like an echo from the past. The idea is that strong emotions, especially those tied to trauma or violence, they can actually leave a kind of psychic imprint on a location. And these imprints, they can be replayed almost like a recording, manifesting as apparitions, sounds, or even physical sensations.
So basically, all those years of despair and fear and sudden death at 50 Berkeley Square, they could have soaked into the walls, creating this paranormal residue.
That's the theory.
I mean, it's a chilling thought, but I can see how it would be appealing to people who believe in the paranormal.
It's a way to explain the unexplainable. And then you've got theories about specific entities haunting the house. There's one that suggests there's a trapped female spirit on the top floor, maybe connected to one of the unexplained deaths. And then there's another theory, even creepier, that suggests there's a demonic presence. Like that's the source of all the negative energy people have reported feeling there.
A demonic presence. Wow. Okay, that definitely amps up the fear factor. But where do these theories even come from? Is it just based on the overall vibe of the place, or is there actual evidence that points to specific entities?
It's usually a bit of both. Paranormal investigators, they use all sorts of tools and techniques, things like EVP recordings, electromagnetic field detectors. They're trying to capture evidence of, well, spirit activity. And they also dig into the history of the house, looking for clues in old documents or eyewitness accounts, trying to see if they can connect certain events to specific entities.
So it's like a detective investigation, but instead of fingerprints and DNA, they're looking for signs of ghosts.
You could say that.
It's definitely fascinating, but I also have to wonder how much of it is, subjective interpretation. Could those readings or experiences be influenced by the investigator's own beliefs and what they're expecting to find?
That's a great point, and it's a major criticism that skeptics have. They say that a lot of paranormal investigations aren't very scientific. They rely too much on anecdotal evidence, and they point to things like pareidolia. That's where our brains see patterns or faces in random things. Or the power of suggestion, where what we expect to happen actually influences what we experience.
So a shadow moving in a room could just be a trick of the light, and a whisper could be our own imagination messing with us.
It's possible.
It makes you wonder how much of what we call paranormal is just our brains trying to make sense of things we don't understand.
That's a big part of it, I think. And skeptics also say that we need to look at more, well, ordinary explanations for what's been reported at 50 Berkeley Square. For example, the house itself. We're talking about a building that's almost 300 years old. That's a lot of time for things to settle, warp, and create those creepy sounds we associate with haunted houses.
Okay, so those creaks and groans, they might not be ghosts, just the house aging.
Exactly.
But wouldn't all those violent incidents be kind of unusual even for a really old house?
That's a fair point. Skeptics would say that some of those deaths, while definitely tragic, could have been accidents. Maybe made worse by the fact that the house already had this reputation for being haunted.
So someone hears a strange noise, their mind's already full of ghost stories, and they overreact, leading to an accident.
It's possible.
It shows how our perceptions can be shaped by the context of the situation.
Absolutely. And there are even more explanations out there. Some researchers have suggested that the strange things happening at 50 Berkeley Square could be caused by, get this, mold.
Mold. Like the stuff that grows in basements. How could that explain ghost sightings or demonic entities?
It's not about the mold itself, but what it can do to us. Certain types of mold, especially black mold, they release these things called mycotoxins, and they can cause all sorts of neurological symptoms like hallucinations, anxiety, even paranoia. Imagine spending a night in a damp, moldy room at 50 Berkeley Square. You start seeing things, hearing voices, feeling this overwhelming sense of dread. It's not hard to see how you might think it's a ghost.
Okay, that's a pretty wild theory. So the haunting could actually be mold poisoning.
It's a possibility.
But what about those violent incidents? Mold can't push people downstairs, can it?
No, of course not. But remember, we're dealing with stories that have been passed down over generations. Details can get twisted, things get added, and sometimes a regular accident gets turned into a supernatural event in the retelling.
It makes you think about how many ghost stories started out as normal things that got misinterpreted or exaggerated over time.
I think it happens a lot more than we realize.
But even if we take away all the sensationalism and the mold hallucinations, there's still something about 50 Berkeley Square that captures our imaginations. Why do you think this house, out of all the houses in London, has become such a symbol for the paranormal? I mean, it feels like 50 Berkeley Square. It's like it's not even a real house anymore, you know?
Right.
It's like it's become this symbol, this icon for like everything haunted and creepy.
It really has, hasn't it?
You see it everywhere, like ghost tours, TV shows about paranormal investigations, books, articles.
It's almost like the house itself is famous.
Yeah, like it's a celebrity.
And even though nobody actually lives there anymore, it's an antique bookstore now.
Antique bookstore. That's kind of ironic, right?
You'd think they have trouble keeping the lights on,
Right.
but people are still drawn to it. Like there's this pull, this energy.
It's like, when you're driving and you see an accident and you just have to slow down and look.
Oh yeah, that rubbernecking thing.
Yeah, even though, you probably shouldn't.
That morbid curiosity.
Exactly. It's like we're fascinated by these dark stories, these glimpses into the unknown.
We want to feel that little shiver of fear, that little brush with something beyond our understanding.
So maybe 50 Berkeley Square is not just about ghosts and hauntings. Maybe it's about us,
About us.
Yeah, about our relationship with the things we can't explain, our desire to understand the world, and maybe even face our own fears about death and what comes after.
It's a reminder that even though we live in this modern world with science and technology, there are still places where logic doesn't quite fit.
But the shadows seem to whisper, and the unknown is just out of reach.
And whether you believe in ghosts or not, 50 Berkeley Square makes you think about the limits of what we know.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into 50 Berkeley Square, I'm left with one question. If you could spend a night there knowing everything we've talked about, the history, the legends, the possible explanations,
Would you do it?
would you do it?
Would you bring a whole team of paranormal investigators?
With all the gadgets and gizmos?
EMF readers, EVP recorders, the whole shebang?
Or would you go alone, just you and your curiosity?
Would you try to talk to the spirits? Or would you just stay away from anything that might stir trouble?
It's like a choose-your-own-adventure story in the middle of one of London's greatest mysteries.
We want to hear from you. What would you do if you had a night at 50 Berkeley Square?
The story's still being written, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be the one to write the next chapter. All right, so today we're diving into the Pennsylvania Hermitage. And, it's not just your average spooky old house, right? This place has like a whole century, over a century, of just weird stuff happening.
It really does.
Yeah, we're talking disappearances, we're talking strange events, and we're talking stories that will just make your skin crawl.
Definitely.
So we've got historical records, we've got eyewitness accounts, and even some scientific and paranormal investigations to dig into.
That's right.
So are you guys ready
Let's do it.
to unravel the mysteries of the Hermitage?
Absolutely. What I find particularly interesting about this case is just the volume, the sheer volume, and the variety of reports that we have about this place. And I think a good place to start is with the disappearance of the entire Blackwood family in 1901.
Okay.
They just vanished. No trace.
Wow.
We just behind a fully set dinner table.
Like they were about to eat dinner.
Untouched belongings. Their clothes were still in the closets. It's like they just stepped out of existence.
Yeah, it's like they just poof, gone.
Exactly.
And this is really, you said it sets the tone. This is like the beginning,
The
right?
beginning of a very long and strange story.
And it doesn't stop there, right? Because every single owner after the Blackwoods, they all report unsettling experiences. And a lot of them, it was so bad, they just left. They were driven away by whatever they encountered.
It makes you wonder, right, if there's something about the location itself that, that makes these things happen, that draws these events to it. Because it's not just random occurrences, it's a pattern, a consistent pattern of strange happenings that have been going on for decades, literally decades.
Yeah.
And it's not just like feelings or vibes. We're talking about actual events. For example, take the Mitchell family in 1943. They claimed they were physically attacked
Whoa.
by an unseen
Like
force.
a ghost or something.
That's what they claimed.
Whoa.
An experience so terrifying, they abandoned the hermitage. They just left. They couldn't take it anymore.
Okay, so we've got a family vanishing into thin air.
Right.
We've got invisible attackers.
Yes.
Let's get into some of these first-hand accounts that we've collected.
Okay.
So in 1968, Helen Carter reported seeing a hooded figure at the entrance of the Hermitage, only to have it vanish right before her eyes.
Right, and that's just one of many, many reports of shadowy figures and apparitions. It's a common thread in the Hermitage's story.
It seems like every spooky house has a shadowy figure. Why is that?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Are these just echoes of past events? Residual hauntings, as some people call them?
Okay.
Or are we talking about something more interactive, something more intelligent?
Oh, okay.
Are we dealing with actual entities, or are these just, imprints on the environment?
That's creepy.
It is a bit creepy.
So then there's the 1977 paranormal investigation. They managed to record some unexplained sounds coming from the walls.
Oh, yeah, I've heard those recordings.
Yeah,
Cries, screams.
it's scary stuff.
It really is. And even after they had experts analyze the sounds, they couldn't figure out what they were. No explanation.
So something's definitely going on. What about the hikers?
Oh, right, right. So fast forward to 2003, we have this case of missing hikers, right?
Mm-hmm.
They disappear near the Hermitage, only to be found miles away, like miles and miles away, 12 hours later.
That's bizarre.
Absolutely bizarre. And here's the kicker. They had absolutely no memory of what happened.
None.
None whatsoever. It's like they just blinked and 12 hours had gone by.
Like a blackout.
Exactly.
And they were just miles away from where they were supposed to be. That sounds a lot like those stories about portals or dimensional shifts.
It does, doesn't it? And, people who claim to have experienced those kinds of things, they often talk about lost time and disorientation, just like those hikers. So it does make you wonder if maybe, just maybe, they stumbled into some sort of, alternate reality or something.
Okay, so we've got vanishings, we've got attacks, we've got hooded figures.
Right.
We've got unexplained sounds.
Yeah.
And we've got hikers who just disappear and reappear with no memory of where they've been. I mean, what is going on at the Pennsylvania Hermitage?
It's a puzzle.
It's a really creepy puzzle.
And I think in order to start putting the pieces together, we need to look at some of the possible explanations.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's try to make sense of this.
So one of the leading scientific theories is that the Hermitage might be sitting on top of a very strong electromagnetic field.
Okay.
And there are some researchers who believe that those fields can actually cause hallucinations, and they can affect how people perceive their surroundings.
So it's messing with people's minds, basically.
That's the theory, yeah.
Okay, so that could explain some of the, I guess the sensory stuff, like the seeing things, hearing things. But what about the physical stuff?
Right.
Like the attacks, the disappearances, things moving on their own?
Yeah, that's where this theory kind of falls short. It doesn't really explain those physical aspects, does it?
Not really.
So it's possible that there are other environmental factors at play that, that we haven't fully explored yet.
Okay, so maybe there's a scientific explanation that we just haven't discovered yet.
It's possible.
What about the paranormal theories? What are some of those?
Well, I'm sure you've heard of Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Of course.
Famous paranormal investigators. They investigated the Hermitage.
Okay.
And they documented all sorts of weird stuff.
Like what?
Sudden temperature shifts, moving objects, the classic signs of a haunting, at least according to their perspective.
That's pretty compelling evidence. So what did they conclude?
Well, their investigation really brought the Hermitage into the public eye. And their findings, while, they're difficult to scientifically verify, they definitely fueled this belief that there are supernatural entities present at the Hermitage.
Right, so their work is definitely popular. But I know it's also been met with skepticism from some, particularly in the scientific community.
It has, which is understandable, I guess, because, their method weren't always the most scientific, but they were pioneers in their field, that's for sure.
And then there's this whole idea of alternate dimensions, which we touched on a bit earlier.
Right. The idea that there are other realities existing right alongside our own.
Like parallel universes.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, the Hermitage is somehow connected to those other dimensions.
Which could explain the hikers disappearing and reappearing miles away.
Exactly. It's a popular idea, but it's incredibly difficult to prove. We just don't have the tools or the understanding to really delve into that realm yet.
It's all so fascinating, but so mysterious, too.
Absolutely.
And then there's the idea of residual energy, right?
Oh, right, yes. That's a theory that suggests past events, especially those that were highly emotional, can leave sort of an imprint on a location.
So like an echo of the past.
Exactly. And those imprints can manifest as ghostly apparitions or sounds or even feelings.
So maybe some of the things people are experiencing at the Hermitage are just echoes of past tragedies.
It's possible, yeah. But, residual energy typically explains the more passive phenomena, like the sights and sounds. It doesn't really account for the more interactive stuff, the thing that seem to have a will of their own.
So we've got all these theories, scientific and paranormal, and none of them seem to fully explain everything that's been going on at the Hermitage.
Right. And I think it's important to keep in mind that we may never have all the answers, but that doesn't mean we stop searching, right?
Exactly. So where do we go from here? We've got all these unexplained events, all these strange phenomena. How do we even begin to make sense of it all?
Well, I think a good next step is to hear from some of the leading experts who have, dedicated their lives to understanding the unexplained.
Okay, I'm all ears.
I've reached out to a few experts with varying perspectives on the Hermitage, and I think it would be really interesting to hear what they have to say. Because what I find fascinating is that each one brings a unique viewpoint to the table.
Okay, so we're going to hear from some experts who have really studied the Hermitage.
Exactly.
I'm really excited about this. Let's bring them on.
All right, so first up, we have Dr. Peterson. He's a parapsychologist, and he spent years studying paranormal activity. He's very familiar with the Hermitage and its history.
Okay, so Dr. Peterson, the parapsychologist, what does he have to say about the Hermitage?
Well, he acknowledges the documented paranormal activity. Of course, all the reports, the evidence, is hard to ignore that. But he's also very cautious. He's very careful not to jump to any conclusions.
That makes sense. I mean, with something as strange as the Hermitage, you got to be careful not to let your imagination run wild, right?
Exactly. You need to be objective. You need to look at the evidence, but you also need to be open-minded. And that's what I appreciate about Dr. Peterson's approach. He's got that balance.
Okay, so what about Lorraine Warren? We talked about her and Ed earlier. What's her take on the Hermitage?
Well, Lorraine, she's all in on the negative energy theory. Oh, yeah, she's convinced that the Hermitage is harboring some very dark forces. In fact, she even issued a warning to anyone thinking about visiting the place.
Whoa, okay. That's a little spooky.
Yeah, she's not one to mince words, that's for sure. But her perspective comes from years and years of experience investigating paranormal activity, so it's definitely worth considering.
And what about the scientist, Dr. Hartley, I think you said her name was?
Dr. Hartley, yes, she's a physicist, and she believes that electromagnetism is the most likely explanation for what's happening at the Hermitage.
Okay, so she's sticking with the scientific explanation.
Right, and this is the interesting part, she doesn't rule out other possibilities.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, she's open to the idea that there may be things we don't fully understand yet.
I like that. It's like she's saying science is important, but we also have to acknowledge that there may be things out there that science can't explain, at least not yet.
Exactly. And then we have the historian who provides some really valuable context for this whole discussion.
Okay, what does the historian have to say?
Well, he reminds us that the Hermitage's history is deeply intertwined with tragedy. There have been accidents, there have been deaths, there have been all sorts of unfortunate events associated with the property.
So maybe some of the paranormal activity is tied to those events.
It's possible. And he also points out that it's really hard to separate fact from legend at this point.
Yeah, after all these years, the stories have probably become embellished, exaggerated, right?
Right. And that's something we have to keep in mind because human perception can really amplify these perceived hauntings.
That's true. I mean, if you go to a place expecting to find ghosts, you're probably going to find ghosts, whether they're really there or not.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've heard from a parapsychologist, a paranormal investigator, a physicist, and a historian. That's quite a range of perspectives.
It is, and I think it's important to consider all of them because the truth, whatever it may be, is probably somewhere in the middle.
So after all of this, all the history, all the eyewitness accounts, all the theories and expert opinions, what can we say about the Pennsylvania Hermitage? Is it haunted? Is it a portal to another dimension? Is it just a place with some really bad vibes? What's the answer?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, I don't think there's a simple answer. But I think even without a definitive answer, we can still appreciate the mystery, we can still learn from it, and we can still be captivated by it.
I agree. The Pennsylvania Hermitage, it's a puzzle, it's a mystery, it's a place that challenges our understanding of the world.
And maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not about finding the answers, but about embracing the questions.
I like that. Embracing the questions. Because sometimes the questions are more intriguing than the answers.
And that's what makes it so compelling, right? This place, it defies easy explanation. Despite all the accounts, all the investigations, we're still left with, well, more questions than answers.
It's true. And I think for a lot of our listeners, those folks who are fascinated by the Hermitage, but maybe not ready to book a ghost hunting trip just yet, what's the biggest takeaway from all this?
That's a really good question. I think at its core, the Hermitage represents this universal human fascination that we have with the mysteries of the universe. It's this physical manifestation of our desire to understand the boundaries of what we know and what might be possible.
It's like we're stepping into an X-Files episode, right?
A little bit, yeah.
But maybe on a more practical level, I feel like the Hermitage gives us this almost like case study in how we approach the unknown.
I see what you mean.
Do we lean on scientific explanations even if they don't cover everything? Or do we allow ourselves to consider the possibility of things that are beyond our current understanding, even if it means, venturing into the paranormal?
It's a tricky balance, isn't it? Because on the one hand, we're naturally drawn to rational explanations, right? We want to base our understanding of the world on what we can observe and measure.
Makes sense.
But there's also this part of us, I think, that's drawn to the mysterious, the unexplained, the possibility that reality is more than what we see on the surface.
Yeah, it's like that saying, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Exactly.
It's kind of exciting, but also a little unsettling.
It is, and the Pennsylvania Hermitage, it really exemplifies that, doesn't it? It's a place where the known and the unknown intersect, where our assumptions about the world are challenged, and where we're kind of forced to confront the limits of our understanding.
So let's say I'm convinced. I want to learn more. Where do I even begin with a place like the Hermitage?
Oh, there's a wealth of information out there. You can dive into historical archives, read accounts from past residents, or even explore the findings of paranormal investigators, like the Warrens.
Okay.
And there are scientific studies on electromagnetism and its effects on human perception.
So there's really something for everyone, whether you're into history, science, or you're a hardcore ghost hunter?
Exactly. The key is to approach all this information with a critical eye.
Yeah.
Evaluate the evidence, draw your own conclusion, and don't be afraid to question what you read or hear.
That's great advice, especially with a place like the Hermitage. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of it all.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But it's important to remember that we all have our own lens through which we view the world, and that shapes how we interpret these experiences.
Absolutely. And I think that brings us to the heart of this deep dive, really. It's not just about uncovering the truth of the Pennsylvania Hermitage. It's about exploring how we as individuals approach the unknown. What do we choose to believe? What evidence resonates with us? And how do we reconcile our personal experiences with the broader understanding of the world around us?
Those are some deep thoughts. But that's what makes this so engaging.
I agree.
Before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, this possibility that the Hermitage could be a portal to another dimension.
Ah, yes, the dimensional portal theory. A captivating idea, isn't it? The notion that other realities could exist alongside our own, separated by this thin veil that might be pierced under certain conditions.
It's mind-boggling. And it seems to connect back to those stories of people disappearing and then reappearing miles away with absolutely no memory of the time in between.
Exactly. Think back to those hikers in 2003. Their sudden disappearance and reappearance, the fact that they had complete amnesia about what happened, it does lend itself to this idea of a dimensional shift.
Like they stepped through a doorway into another world and then back again without any recollection of the journey.
Precisely. The challenge, of course, is proving it. We don't yet have the scientific tools or the understanding to even detect or measure these hypothetical dimensions, let alone observe how they might interact with our own.
So it's still very much in the realm of speculation, but a fascinating speculation nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it makes you wonder, what if the Hermitage is just the tip of the iceberg? What if there are portals all around us, just waiting to be discovered?
Now, that's a thought-provoking idea. It really makes you wonder if these strange occurrences at the Hermitage aren't unique, but rather just a glimpse into this larger phenomenon that we're only beginning to understand.
Okay, now you're really getting me thinking. But realistically, if these portals do exist, why haven't more people encountered them? What makes the Hermitage such a hotspot for this kind of activity?
That's a great question. One possible explanation is that these portals are, well, they're unstable. They might flicker in and out of existence. Or maybe they require specific conditions to activate.
Like a cosmic doorway that only opens at certain times or under very specific circumstances?
Exactly. And maybe the Hermitage, with its unique location, its history, or even the energy it holds, acts as a focal point, amplifying these interdimensional fluctuations.
So it's like a beacon, drawing in these energies and opening up pathways to other realities. That's pretty cool, but also a bit unsettling, to be honest.
I agree. It definitely adds another layer of complexity to the mystery of the Pennsylvania Hermitage. And it highlights this idea that despite our best efforts to understand the universe, there are still vast realms of knowledge that are beyond our grasp.
That's what I love about this. It's a reminder that there's always more to learn, more to explore. And this pursuit of knowledge, it's a continuous journey.
Well said. And who knows what incredible discoveries we might make along the way.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've gone through the history, the eyewitness accounts, the scientific theories. We've even stepped into the world of the paranormal. But the Pennsylvania Hermitage, well, it's still holding on to its secrets.
And that's part of its allure, isn't it? That lingering mystery. It encourages us to keep questioning, to keep exploring, to embrace the unknown.
It's like a giant cosmic puzzle box, and we've only managed to open a few of the compartments. But the glimpses we've gotten, they're enough to pique our curiosity and leave us wanting more.
And that's the beauty of a deep dive like this, right? It's not about arriving at definitive answers. It's about broadening our perspectives, challenging our assumptions, and deepening our appreciation for the mysteries that still surround us.
So as we wrap up our exploration of the Pennsylvania Hermitage, I have to ask, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to ponder?
You know, if I were to leave you with one thought, it would be this. The Pennsylvania Hermitage, with all its strangeness, with all those unexplained events, it really reminds us that the world is far more complex and wondrous than we often realize. There are mysteries yet to be solved, forces we don't fully understand, and realities waiting to be discovered.
It's a powerful message for sure. It's like a call to embrace our curiosity, to question what we think we know, and to stay open to the possibility that there's always more to learn.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, the Pennsylvania Hermitage, with its enduring enigma, will inspire some of our listeners to embark on their own journeys of discovery,
I love that.
to explore the unknown and contribute to our collective understanding of the universe and our place in it.
That's beautifully said. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mysteries of the Pennsylvania Hermitage. It's been an incredible journey,
It has.
and I hope our listeners have enjoyed it as much as we have.
The pleasure was all mine. Sharing these insights with you and our listeners has been a truly rewarding experience.
Well, thank you again for your expertise and for sharing your insights with us.
Of course, anytime.
And to our listeners, remember, the exploration doesn't end here. There's a whole universe of mystery out there just waiting to be explored. So keep those minds curious, folks, and we'll see you on our next deep dive. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready for another deep dive? This time we're heading to Italy to explore a mystery that's been chilling spines for decades.
Oh, yeah, this one, the classic.
We're talking about Villa Maledetta,
Ah, Villa Maledetta.
a house in Turin that became infamous back in 1972. Just imagine for a second you're the Bernardi family. An ordinary family living in what you think is an ordinary house. It's nighttime, everyone's getting ready for bed, and well, that's when things start to go very wrong. Like seriously wrong.
You said it. We're talking whispers in the dead of night, objects moving on their own, shadows flitting around.
I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be getting much sleep with all that going on.
Yeah, what makes the Villa Maledetta case so fascinating is that it wasn't just a one-off thing. This family, the Bernardis, endured months of this escalating paranormal activity, and each event seemed to be even more unsettling than the last.
So let's break it down. I mean, start subtly, right? Just creepy sounds, the house feeling colder than it should. But then things take a truly terrifying turn.
Well, yeah, think about it. The feeling of constantly being watched, like there's an unseen presence lurking just out of sight. Add to that these crazy temperature shifts, like you're shivering even in the middle of summer, and then the ultimate terror, you start seeing things. Witnesses described this shadowy figure always just out of reach.
Okay, so we've got the spooky sounds, the temperature swings, the feeling of being watched, and this shadowy figure. I mean, I'd be packing my bags already. But it gets weirder, right?
Oh yeah, it definitely gets weirder. One of the most mind-boggling parts of this whole thing is the way objects would just move. And you're not just talking about things falling off shelves, we're talking full-on levitation, objects defying gravity. This is where it really starts to feel like we're crossing over from a haunted house into something truly unexplainable.
And then there's the whole thing with those mysterious messages appearing in mirrors throughout the house. I mean, that's some straight-up horror movie stuff. So what did they say, these messages? Were they warns, threats, or something even more cryptic?
Well, that's the thing. The exact content of those messages is still a bit of a mystery. Some reports suggest they were these unsettling phrases or symbols, but the details are kind of hazy. It's almost as if the messages themselves were meant to stay hidden, adding another layer to the creepiness.
It's like the mystery itself is part of the haunting.
Right.
And to add to all of this, we've got police officers being called to the scene and witnessing these events firsthand. These aren't exactly people who are easily spooked.
You'd think about, can you imagine being a skeptical police officer walking into that house and then seeing objects moving or hearing these unexplained voices? That would definitely shake things up a bit.
It really highlights how real this was for the people who experienced it. This wasn't just some overactive imaginations or a family trying to get attention.
No, not at all. We're talking about over 50 eyewitness accounts from people of all different backgrounds, and they all describe similar phenomena. That's a lot of people having the same strange experiences.
So it's not just one or two people seeing things. It's a whole group of people, including law enforcement, experiencing these bizarre phenomena. So what happened with the official investigation? Did they ever find any logical explanation for what was happening at Villa Maledetta?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. They did a really thorough investigation, but the police couldn't find any physical evidence to explain any of it.
Really?
Yeah, they checked for hidden wires, trickery, anything that might suggest a hoax, but nothing. They even ruled out the possibility of the Bernardi family faking it.
Wow, so no physical evidence, no signs of a hoax. If it wasn't a prank, what explanations did people come up with? Did anyone try to connect the dots and figure out what was happening in that house?
Oh, of course. There were quite a few theories going around, each trying to make sense of the unexplainable. Some scientists suggested that maybe there were some unusual electromagnetic fields in the area.
Electromagnetic fields?
Yeah, the idea is that those fields could mess with brain activity and cause hallucinations and strange sensory experiences.
Interesting. I've heard that electromagnetic fields are a pretty common explanation for paranormal activity, but could they really explain objects physically moving or those messages appearing in the mirrors? I don't know about that.
You're right to be skeptical. That's the problem with the electromagnetic field theory. It might explain some of the subjective stuff, like feeling watched or hearing weird noises, but it doesn't really account for the more physical phenomena that were reported at Villa Maledetta.
It's like a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture.
Exactly.
So we've got electromagnetic fields as a maybe, but not a complete answer. What other theories were there? Did anyone look at it from a more, let's say, supernatural perspective?
Well, there were the parapsychologists, the folks who specialize in paranormal phenomena. They had their own take on it.
Oh, this should be good. What did they think was going on?
They were leaning towards a poltergeist.
A poltergeist? You mean like a mischievous spirit?
Yeah, or even a malevolent one. They thought that might be behind the haunting.
Classic poltergeist activity. But how did they link that to the events at Villa Maledetta? Was there something about the Bernardi family or the house that might attract that kind of spirit?
The theory was that the poltergeist could be connected to some kind of emotional distress within the family.
Emotional distress.
Yeah, the idea is that strong emotions, especially negative ones like fear or anger, can create this energy that attracts or maybe even fuels poltergeist activity. So the theory is that the family's anxiety and fear, which makes sense given what was happening, might have actually made the paranormal activity stronger.
So it's like a vicious cycle. The fear feeds the poltergeist creates more fear, and so on.
Exactly.
So we got two main contenders, weird electromagnetic fields and a poltergeist feeding off the family's fear. But it sounds like neither theory really explains everything that happened at Villa Maledetta. Did any other experts or researchers weigh in on this case? What did they make of all this?
Oh, absolutely. This case got a lot of attention from experts in different fields, from journalists to criminologists to paranormal investigators. They each had a different take on what happened at Villa Maledetta.
Okay, let's hear it. Who were some of these experts and what were their thoughts on this crazy case?
Well, there was this journalist, Marco Allegri. He wrote for La Repubblica, one of Italy's biggest newspapers.
Big name.
He covered the Villa Maledetta case a lot and called it one of the most well-documented paranormal cases in Italian history. What really struck him was the sheer number of credible witnesses and how consistent their stories were.
That's pretty powerful coming from a seasoned journalist. He must have been convinced that something strange was happening to make a claim like that. Did he lean towards any particular explanation or did he stay neutral?
He was careful not to say he was an expert on the paranormal. He mainly focused on reporting the facts and presenting the different eyewitness accounts. He let the readers draw their own conclusions, but he did say it was hard to just brush aside the sheer number of people and how similar their stories were. He didn't rule out something truly unexplainable happening.
So we have a journalist documenting the strangeness but not saying what he believes. What about someone from a more scientific field? Did anyone try to look at the case from a more grounded perspective?
Dr. Giulia Romano, she's a well-known criminologist, offered a more rational take on the whole thing. She thought it could be a combination of things, including what's called collective suggestion.
Collective suggestion? What's that?
It's the idea that when a bunch of people believe in something like the paranormal, especially when they're feeling scared or anxious, it can make their experiences stronger and lead them to see or hear things that might not actually be there.
That's an interesting idea. It makes you wonder how much of what people experienced was influenced by their own expectations and all the fear surrounding the house.
Yeah, it's like a feedback loop.
Did Dr. Amato have any other ideas about what might be happening psychologically within the Bernardi family or the community as a whole?
Well, she also brought up the idea of stress-induced psychological phenomena.
Stress-induced psychological phenomena. Okay, break that down for me.
Basically, when people are under a lot of stress or anxiety, their perception can get distorted. They might misinterpret things they see or hear, seeing or hearing things that aren't actually there. Or their brains might fill in the gaps, creating false memories based on what they expect to happen.
So she's suggesting that all the fear and stress surrounding the events could have literally caused people to hallucinate or misinterpret what they were experiencing. It makes you think, right? But did Dr. Romano completely rule out the possibility of something paranormal happening at Villa Maledetta? Did she admit that some things couldn't be easily explained away, even with psychology?
She did, actually. She said that some details, like those levitating objects and the cryptic messages in the mirrors, were tough to explain with just psychology.
Yeah, those are pretty hard to explain away.
She admitted that there might be things in the case that go beyond what science can currently explain.
So even a skeptic like Dr. Romano had to admit that some things just couldn't be easily explained. It's like the case itself was pushing the boundaries of what we consider possible. But it sounds like there were people who were totally open to the possibility of a genuine paranormal explanation. Did any of the experts go all in on the supernatural side of things?
Oh yeah, for sure. We can't forget about Luca Viani, a researcher who specialized in parapsychology. He was absolutely convinced that Villa Maledetta was a real-deal paranormal case. He had some pretty interesting evidence to support his claims, too.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of evidence convinced a seasoned paranormal investigator like Viani that Villa Maledetta was the real deal? Did he have any hard proof?
Well, one of the most convincing pieces of evidence he brought up was a bunch of audio recordings that were made inside the villa. These recordings, after they were analyzed, apparently had voices and sounds that couldn't be explained by anything known or any environmental factors.
Hold on. They actually have recordings of these unexplained voices. Wow, that's pretty creepy. I mean, it's one thing to see something out of the corner of your eye, something your brain could just dismiss as a trick of the light. But to hear actual voices on a recording that you can't explain? That's on a whole other level.
Exactly. Vianney argued that those recordings, along with how many eyewitness accounts there were and how similar they all were, made a very strong case for real paranormal activity at Villa Maledetta.
It's amazing how this one case could be seen in so many different ways. You have scientists looking for logical explanations, psychologists looking at the power of the mind, and paranormal investigators looking for proof of the supernatural. It's like the truth of Villa Maledetta is somewhere in the middle of all these viewpoints.
Yeah, that's what makes it so fascinating. It really forces you to think about what you believe and to consider the possibility that there might be more to the world than we can explain with science or logic right now.
And it's not just scientists and investigators who were captivated by Villa Maledetta, right? This whole thing had a huge impact on Italian society and culture. It's like this haunted house story seeped into the collective consciousness of the country.
Oh, totally. The Villa Maledetta case became a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of the unexplained and how powerful mystery can be. It inspired a ton of books, movies, and documentaries.
It's crazy how a real-life event like this can become such a source of inspiration for our imaginations. Did it spark any trends in Italian horror or paranormal fiction? Did any specific books or movies stand out as being directly inspired by Villa Maledetta?
It's hard to say for sure, but there's no doubt that Villa Maledetta made people much more interested in paranormal stuff in Italian popular culture. The case really resonated with people's fascination with the unexplained and made them want to explore the darker side of reality through stories.
So it wasn't just the case itself, but how it affected art, literature, and even how people thought about the world. But the impact went beyond just stories, right? What happened to the actual house? Did anyone ever live in Villa Maledetta after the Bernardi family left?
Well, the house became like a pilgrimage site for people who were into the paranormal and those who just like spooky stuff. People flocked to Villa Maledetta hoping to see something weird or experience the chills firsthand. But its reputation was just too much in the end. The house was eventually abandoned, left to crumble under the weight of its own spooky history.
It's kind of eerie and fitting at the same time. The house itself became a monument to the mystery, a physical embodiment of all the fear and fascination it created. You can practically imagine all the stories and legends that sprung up around the abandoned villa.
Oh, absolutely. It's like you can feel the history, the fear, and all the unanswered questions just hanging in the air around that abandoned place. It's a stark reminder that some of the scariest stories are rooted in real places and real events, places where it's hard to tell what's fact and what's fiction.
We had this house that was a regular family home, and it turned into a paranormal hotspot, a place that attracted both curious folks and terrified ones, before finally being left to decay. What a powerful image. But Villa Maledetta had an impact that went beyond the walls of the house, right? It ignited a much larger conversation about the nature of reality and how much we really understand about the world.
You're absolutely right. The Villa Maledetta case really stirred up a big national debate about the existence of the paranormal and how it relates to science. It made people think about what they believed, about whether there might be more to the world than we can see.
It's that classic struggle, isn't it? The tension between what science tells us and things that just don't seem logical or reasonable. You have folks who believe that Villa Maledetta is proof positive of the supernatural, proof that there are forces out there that we just don't get.
And then you have those who are skeptical, arguing that while the things people experience at Villa Maledetta were definitely real for them, there has to be a logical explanation for it all, whether it's psychology, environmental factors, or maybe a mix of both. They talk about how fear and suggestion can really mess with our perception and make us think we're seeing paranormal stuff when we're not.
It's like two sides of the same coin. Evidence of the supernatural versus the power of our own minds to create the unexplainable. And the crazy thing is, neither side can definitively prove or disprove the other. So where does that leave us with Villa Maledetta? After all the investigations, the theories, and the debates, is there any resolution? Has anyone been able to definitively say what caused all the weird stuff that happened in that house?
Nope, not really. Despite all the investigating, the theories, and the arguing, the Villa Maledetta case is still unsolved. It's like a paranormal cold case. It's a big question mark hanging over our desire to have all the answers.
In a way, that's frustrating, but also kind of exciting. Frustrating because we want closure, we want to know the truth. But it's exciting because the mystery lives on. It keeps our imaginations working, it challenges our ideas about the world, and it keeps the conversation going.
Exactly. It reminds us that even with all our science and technology, there are still mysteries out there that we just can't solve. Questions that are left hanging.
It makes you wonder if some mysteries are just meant to stay unsolved. Like a reminder that we don't have all the answers, and there are things in the world that we just might not ever fully understand. Do you think we should even try to find a definite answer? Or is there something to be said for just accepting the mystery and letting it make us more curious and make us want to explore the unknown?
That's a question that's been around forever. Philosophers, scientists, they've all wrestled with it. Is the whole point of searching for knowledge to find answers, or is it about the journey, the exploring, the asking questions? I think the Villa Maledetta case points towards the journey. It makes us think critically, look at things from different angles, and consider that maybe there's more to reality than we can see or understand right now.
It's like Villa Maledetta is challenging us, daring us to come up with our own explanations, our own conclusions based on what we know or don't know. It wants us to engage with the mystery, decide what we believe. Do you think that's part of why people are still so fascinated by this case after all this time?
I think so. It's not just about the creepy stuff that happened, but the questions it brings up. It taps into this basic human need to understand the world around us, to make sense of things that seem impossible. And when we come across a mystery that we can't easily explain, it pulls us in. We have to try and figure it out.
It's like Villa Maledetta is a mirror, showing us our own beliefs and anxieties. If you're a scientific person, you might look for logical explanations, try to debunk the paranormal stuff. But if you're more open to the supernatural, you might see Villa Maledetta as proof that there are forces out there that we just don't understand. It's wild how one case can get such different reactions and interpretations.
And that's what's so cool about these mysteries that stick around. They make us talk, they make us explore different ways of seeing things. They remind us that there's always something new to learn, something new to question. And the way we see reality is always changing.
Villa Maledetta reminds us that the world is a big, mysterious place, full of secrets and things we might never fully understand. But maybe that's okay. Maybe a little mystery keeps us curious, keeps us searching, keeps us pushing the limits of what we think we have. What about you, listener? Does the idea of the unknown excite you, or does it make you a little nervous? Are you drawn to mysteries like Villa Maledetta, or do you prefer to stick with things that are known and explained?
It doesn't matter if you embrace the mystery or try to solve it. There's no denying that the Villa Maledetta case shows us how much we don't know and how much we're drawn to the unknown. It's a story that still haunts us, makes us ask questions, makes us wonder, and makes us want to explore the strange parts of our world.
So that's the chilling tale of Villa Maledetta. A normal house turned into a whirlwind of paranormal activity. A place where the line between reality and something else got blurry. It left behind fear, fascination, and a bunch of unanswered questions. What will you take away from our deep dive today? Will you be looking over your shoulder more often? Listening a little closer to the sounds in your own home?
Just remember, the world is full of unexplained things and the adventure never ends. Keep your mind open, stay curious, and never stop exploring what's out there. You never know what mysteries are waiting to be discovered.
Thanks for coming along with us on this exploration of Villa Maledetta. Until next time, sweet dreams, and don't let the shadows get you.